Los Angeles shimmered under the glow of flashing cameras and the electric anticipation of a grand movie premiere. It was one of the most awaited nights of the year, where Hollywood's finest gathered in dazzling gowns and sharp tuxedos, eager to celebrate the magic of cinema. Among the A-list celebrities, Keanu Reeves arrived with his characteristic humility, dressed simply and avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. Though the crowd buzzed with excitement, Keanu moved with a quiet grace, standing out not because of extravagance, but because of his effortless authenticity. Just a few seats away sat Anna Carter, a 31-year-old single mother clutching the small hand of her 2-year-old daughter, Sophie. Unlike the Hollywood elite surrounding her, Anna was not famous, nor did she wear designer clothes. She had managed to attend this prestigious event purely by luck. An industry friend had given her last-minute tickets. For Anna, this night wasn't about glamour or mingling with celebrities. It was about giving Sophie a rare and magical memory in an otherwise challenging life. Raising a child alone after being abandoned by her partner before Sophie's birth had been anything but easy. Anna had put her dreams of becoming a screenwriter on hold, struggling to make ends meet while ensuring her daughter never felt the weight of their hardships. Tonight, however, she wanted to forget about the struggles, to simply enjoy the moment and soak in the excitement of the premiere with her little girl. But as the lights dimmed and the previews began, Sophie's attention drifted away from the massive screen. Something else had caught her eye, the irresistible scent of buttery popcorn wafting from a bucket just a few seats away. And in a moment of fearless toddler curiosity, Sophie made her move, unknowingly setting the stage for an unforgettable encounter with one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. As the lights in the theater dimmed and the previews rolled across the massive screen, the audience settled into their seats, ready to be swept away by the magic of cinema. But while the rest of the crowd focused on the film, 2-year-old Sophie had something else on her mind. The rich, buttery scent of freshly popped popcorn filled the air, tantalizing her senses. Her curious blue eyes locked onto the overflowing tub of popcorn sitting just a few seats away. It wasn't just any popcorn, it was the perfect, golden, movie theater popcorn, and it belonged to none other than Keanu Reeves. For Sophie, there were no barriers, no rules of personal space, only the undeniable call of delicious, fluffy popcorn waiting to be claimed. With the fearless determination only a toddler could possess, she slipped off her seat, her tiny sneakers barely making a sound against the plush carpet. Anna, engrossed in the beginning of the movie, didn't notice as her daughter toddled away on a quiet but mischievous mission. A few seats over, Keanu was completely unaware of the little, popcorn bandit making her way toward him. The crowd was beginning to notice, though. Whispers rippled through the audience, some stifling amused chuckles, others holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Sophie, oblivious to the stir she was causing, stretched out her chubby fingers and, with perfect toddler confidence, plunged her hand into the bucket, grabbing a fistful of popcorn as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For a split second, the entire theater seemed to pause. Would Keanu be annoyed? Would he gently shoo her away? Would her innocent act be met with frustration? The air was thick with anticipation. The cameras, the flashing lights, the high-profile industry figures in attendance, it all faded into the background. At this moment, all eyes were on one man and one little girl. Then, Keanu Reeves blinked in surprise, glanced down at the tiny intruder standing beside him, and instead of pulling the bucket away or reacting with irritation, he did something no one expected. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, instantly softening his features. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, and whispered something to Sophie. Whatever he said must have been magic, because in the next second, she erupted into giggles, munching on her stolen prize as if she had just won the lottery. The tension in the room dissolved. Laughter filled the theater. A wave of collective adoration swept through the crowd. At that moment, the premiere was no longer about the movie, it was about an unfiltered, innocent, and entirely unexpected connection between a Hollywood icon and a fearless little girl with a love for popcorn. As Sophie stood in front of Keanu Reeves, her tiny fingers wrapped around a fistful of his popcorn, the entire theater seemed to hold its breath. It was a moment suspended in time, a toddler's innocent boldness meeting the world of Hollywood prestige. Everyone was waiting, wondering how he would react. Most celebrities, caught off guard in a public setting like this, might have gently redirected the child back to her seat, maybe even looked around awkwardly for her parent. But Keanu Reeves was not like most celebrities. Instead of recoiling in surprise or frustration, he simply blinked for a moment, as if processing the sheer absurdity of what had just happened. Then, slowly, a warm, genuine smile spread across his face, a real, unguarded smile that softened his normally serious expression. He didn't pull the bucket away. He didn't scold her. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, and whispered something to Sophie. Whatever he said was enough to send the little girl into a fit of giggles. Her blue eyes sparkled with delight as she stuffed another handful of popcorn into her mouth, completely unaware of the fact that she had just stolen from one of Hollywood's biggest stars. The audience, which had been teetering on the edge of silence, erupted into quiet chuckles and murmurs of admiration. A few people even clapped softly, touched by the unexpected sweetness of the moment. Back in her seat, Anna's heart dropped as she realized what had just happened. Panic surged through her veins as she bolted upright, her face flushing with embarrassment. Sophie, her fearless and endlessly curious little girl, had just helped herself to a stranger's food, and not just any stranger, but Keanu Reeves' popcorn. "I am so sorry," she blurted out, rushing over and scooping Sophie into her arms. "She's still learning boundaries." Her words tumbled out, her mind racing with apologies she hadn't even fully formed yet. But before she could say anything else, Keanu simply lifted a hand in a gentle, reassuring gesture. "It's all right," he said with a calmness that instantly put Anna at ease. His voice was steady, warm, and kind, the same voice that had made him beloved by millions. Then, crouching down so he was at Sophie's eye level, he held out the popcorn bucket again, offering it back to her. "Popcorn always tastes better when it's shared," he said with an easy smile. A soft murmur of admiration swept through the theater. The moment was simple, but profound. It wasn't about a famous actor being charitable or playing into an image, it was about a man, a human being, showing kindness to a child in the most effortless, sincere way possible. Anna stared at him, momentarily speechless. She had spent the last 2 years navigating the world alone, feeling the weight of single motherhood pressing down on her shoulders. People rarely stopped to offer kindness or patience. And yet, here was Keanu Reeves, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, treating her daughter not as an inconvenience, but as a person, treating her not as someone insignificant, but as someone who mattered. For the first time in a long time, Anna felt seen. As she clutched Sophie a little tighter, she swallowed the lump in her throat and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a quiet understanding, a flicker of recognition. Then, as the theater lights dimmed further and the movie began to play, he offered one last, genuine smile. Not the kind meant for cameras or fans, but the kind that said, "I understand." As Annette settled back into her seat, Sophie still happily munching on her newly shared popcorn, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this moment was different. It wasn't just a cute or funny interaction. There was something deeper in the way Keanu Reeves had responded, something almost personal. The way he had looked at Sophie, with a quiet warmth but also a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes, made Anna wonder. She had seen that kind of look before, not in strangers, but in people who had carried loss. It was the kind of expression that lingered just beneath the surface of a smile, that moment of pause before someone spoke, as if they were holding back a memory too painful to revisit. She knew Keanu Reeves' story, or at least what the public knew of it. The tragic loss of his daughter Ava, who was stillborn. The death of Jennifer Syme, the woman he had loved and planned a life with, gone far too soon. His younger sister Kim's long battle with illness. He was a man who had known grief in a way most people couldn't comprehend. And yet, here he was, sitting just a few seats away, smiling at her daughter with a kind of tenderness that felt almost nostalgic. Was he remembering someone? A child he never got to hold? A life he had once imagined but had slipped away before it even began? The thought sent a wave of emotion crashing over Anna. Because she knew what it was like to carry grief too. Raising Sophie alone had been the hardest thing she had ever done. She had been abandoned before Sophie was even born, left to figure out motherhood, career, and survival all on her own. Every sleepless night, every bill that barely got paid, every dream she had to put on hold, it had all shaped her into the person she was now. Strong, independent, resilient. But also, lonely. For so long, she had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone. That she could do this alone. Because letting people in meant risking being left again, and she couldn't afford that. Not for herself, and certainly not for Sophie. But now, as she glanced over at Keanu, she saw something in him that mirrored her own fears, her own solitude. The way he sat there, watching the movie but not really watching, his thoughts somewhere else, told her more than words ever could. Maybe, just maybe, he understood what it felt like to be alone too. The movie played on, its story unfolding on the massive screen, but Anna barely registered it. Instead, she found herself sneaking glances at Keanu, watching how he would occasionally look over at Sophie, as if trying to memorize something about this moment. As if, in some way, this tiny, fearless little girl had unknowingly unearthed something in him that he had buried long ago. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge what she felt hanging in the air between them. But how do you put something like that into words? Instead, she just let the moment be. Sophie, oblivious to the quiet weight of emotion surrounding her, let out a contented sigh and snuggled closer to Anna's side. Anna gently ran her fingers through her daughter's golden curls, grounding herself in the simple comfort of the moment. Then, just as the movie was nearing its climax, Keanu shifted slightly, exhaling in a way that felt heavy. Almost as if he was letting go of something he had been holding onto for too long. And for the first time since meeting him, Anna saw a different kind of expression on his face, not just the sadness of the past, but something else. Something like relief. Like hope. As the credits rolled and the theater erupted into applause, Keanu didn't move right away. He just sat there, his eyes still on the screen, but his mind clearly elsewhere. It wasn't until Sophie stirred, rubbing her sleepy eyes, that he finally seemed to return to the present. More popcorn? She mumbled, half asleep. Keanu let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. I think we finished it all, kiddo. Anna smiled softly, adjusting Sophie in her arms. You made a serious friend tonight, she teased, glancing at Keanu. He met her gaze, and for a brief second, something passed between them again, something silent but undeniable. Yeah, he murmured, his voice softer than before. I think I did. For the first time in a long, long while, Anna let herself believe in something she had long since given up on. Connection. Because maybe, just maybe, she and Keanu weren't as alone as they thought they were. As the final credits rolled and the applause filled the grand theater, Keanu Reeves remained seated, his gaze still lingering on the screen as if he were somewhere else entirely. Around him, the Hollywood elite stood, exchanging handshakes and murmuring about the film, already moving on to the next big moment, the next social interaction. But Keanu wasn't ready to move just yet. Not because of the film, but because of something else. Because of the tiny girl who had stolen his popcorn. Because of the mother who had apologized with a kind of exhaustion and humility that spoke volumes. Because of the way something deep inside of him had stirred at the sight of them, a quiet ache that he had long buried suddenly resurfacing when he least expected it. Sophie, still curled up in Anna's arms, let out a soft yawn, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Keanu glanced over, watching as the little girl nestled closer to her mother, her small fingers curling into Anna's sweater. The sight sent a flicker of something through him, something warm yet unfamiliar. He had spent so much of his life surrounded by people, yet somehow, solitude had always found him. No matter the number of red carpets, interviews, or film premieres, there was always a space within him that felt empty. A space that, once upon a time, he had hoped to fill with a family of his own. But life had other plans. He had loved before, deeply, wholly, but loss had taken it away before it ever had the chance to become something lasting. The daughter he never got to meet, the woman he never got to grow old with. The years had passed, and though the pain had dulled, it had never fully disappeared. He had learned to live with it, to accept that some things just weren't meant for him. And yet, tonight, a 2-year-old girl with golden curls had reached into his popcorn bucket and, in doing so, had reached into a part of him he thought was long gone. Keanu took a breath, shaking himself from his thoughts. He turned his attention back to Anna, who was gently rocking Sophie as she prepared to stand. "I should probably get her home before she gets too cranky," she said, offering a small, apologetic smile. Keanu hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but something in him didn't want this moment to end just yet. "Let me walk you out," he said before he could second-guess himself. Anna blinked, surprised. "Oh, you don't have to do that," she said quickly. "I'm sure you have a million people waiting to talk to you." He gave her a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They'll survive." There was something in the way he said it, something that made Anna pause. She studied him for a moment, as if trying to figure out whether he truly meant it. But then, she simply nodded, adjusting Sophie in her arms. And so they left together. As they stepped outside, the night air greeted them with a crisp coolness, a stark contrast to the flashing lights and roaring energy of Hollywood's chaos. The moment Keanu appeared, the crowd outside erupted, photographers pushed forward, cameras flashed, reporters called his name. But instead of stopping for them, instead of pausing to greet the fans and journalists the way he usually would, Keanu did something unexpected. He placed a gentle hand on Anna's back, guiding her and Sophie toward a quieter exit. It was an almost instinctual gesture, protective but unassuming. Anna felt it, the warmth of his presence beside her, the way he moved as if he was shielding them from the overwhelming chaos of the world outside. She tightened her hold on Sophie, keeping her head down as they weaved through the noise. The cameras, the questions, the eyes watching, it was too much. This wasn't her world. Keanu, sensing her discomfort, leaned in slightly, his voice low but reassuring. "Just keep walking. I'll get you both out of here." And somehow, Anna believed him. They moved swiftly through the crowd, slipping past the chaos until they reached the quieter side of the venue. By the time they stepped into the more secluded parking lot, the noise had faded, the flashing lights no longer blinding. Anna exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she murmured, turning to face him. "I don't know how you deal with all of that every day." Keanu chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You get used to it," he said. "Kind of." Anna gave him a look that told him she didn't believe that for a second. No one should have to get used to that. He smiled at that, a real, genuine smile. Just then, Sophie stirred in her arms, her sleepy voice breaking the quiet. "Popcorn man?" Keanu laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, kiddo." Then, something happened that neither of them expected. Sophie stretched out her tiny arms, reaching for him. Keanu froze. Anna did too. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that carried meaning, that felt heavier than words. Keanu's heart clenched. It was such a simple thing, a child reaching out in trust, in comfort. But to him, it was so much more. He glanced at Anna, silently asking for permission. She hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him, but because something about this moment felt important. Then, slowly, she nodded. And just like that, Keanu Reeves, Hollywood icon, action star, and the man who had spent years believing certain joys were no longer meant for him, found himself holding a sleepy 2-year-old in his arms. Sophie immediately rested her head against his shoulder, sighing contentedly. Keanu barely breathed. For a split second, the world around him disappeared. He had held children before, his sister as a baby, the nieces and nephews of close friends. But this was different. This wasn't family. And yet, it felt like something just as precious. Anna watched them, her throat tightening with emotion she couldn't quite name. There was something so natural about the way Keanu held Sophie, as if he had done this a million times before. As if, in some other life, he had been meant to. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge the weight of what was happening. But before she could, Keanu spoke first. "She reminds me of someone," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna's breath caught. "Someone you lost?" she asked gently. Keanu's jaw tensed. He nodded. There was no need to say who. She already knew. Ava. Jennifer. The pieces of his heart that life had taken too soon. Without thinking, Anna reached out, lightly placing a hand over his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Keanu finally met her gaze. And in that moment, they weren't just two strangers anymore. They were two people who had known loss, who had felt loneliness in its rawest form. And for the first time in a long, long time, neither of them felt quite so alone. As the three of them stood there in the cool Los Angeles night, a strange yet undeniable warmth settled between them. The chaos of the premiere had faded into the background, leaving only this quiet, unexpected moment behind. Keanu still held Sophie in his arms, her tiny fingers gripping his jacket as she nestled sleepily against his shoulder. Anna, standing just inches away, couldn't help but watch. It was surreal, seeing someone like Keanu Reeves, a man who had lived his life in the public, standing here in the dim glow of the streetlights, holding her daughter like she was the most natural thing in the world. Sophie stirred slightly, sighing in her sleep. "She's completely out," Anna murmured, offering a soft, almost apologetic smile. "If I take her home now, she's going to wake up the second I move her. And if that happens," she let out a small chuckle. "It'll be a long night for both of us." Keanu glanced down at the little girl, a quiet amusement flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, I can see that." He hesitated for a moment before looking back at Anna. "Do you want me to?" he trailed off, almost unsure of how to finish the question. Anna studied him, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her purse. She wasn't sure why she said it, why she even considered it, but before she could stop herself, the words were already out. "Do you want to come inside for a bit?" Keanu blinked, clearly surprised. "Inside?" Anna gestured toward her car. "My place isn't far." "You don't have to, of course." She let out a breath, shaking her head. "I don't know why I'm even asking." Keanu was silent for a moment, his gaze steady as he studied her. Maybe she expected him to decline, to smile politely and say he had somewhere else to be. After all, he was Keanu Reeves. He had a world waiting for him, a career, people, obligations. This wasn't his life. But then, something shifted in his expression. "Okay," he said simply. Anna blinked. "Okay." Keanu nodded. "Yeah." He glanced at Sophie, still sleeping soundly in his arms. "Let's get her somewhere comfortable." The drive to Anna's apartment was quiet. Sophie slept through the entire ride, her soft breaths rhythmic against Keanu's chest. Anna stole glances at them in the rearview mirror, the sight of them together sending an unfamiliar warmth through her chest. When they arrived, Keanu followed her inside, moving carefully so as not to wake Sophie. Anna's apartment was small but homey, the kind of place that felt lived in, filled with warmth. Toys were scattered near the couch, a small bookshelf in the corner held well-loved children's books, and a few crayon drawings were pinned to the fridge. "It's not much," Anna said, suddenly self-conscious. "But it's home." Keanu glanced around, taking it all in. "It's nice." And he meant it. Anna grabbed a blanket as Keanu gently laid Sophie down on the couch. The little girl stirred slightly, her tiny fingers reaching for something, someone. Without even thinking, Keanu took her hand in his, and just like that, she settled again, completely at peace. Anna watched, her heart tightening. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The soft glow of morning filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the modest living room. Keanu stirred slightly on the couch, blinking against the light. For a brief moment, he forgot where he was. The familiar hum of Los Angeles traffic outside, the warmth of a cozy apartment, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, it wasn't his world. Then, he heard it. Soft giggles. The tiny rustling of feet against the floor. He turned his head and saw Sophie standing near the couch, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Her golden curls were a mess from sleep, and she clutched a stuffed bunny in one hand. "Popcorn Man," she whispered, excitement bubbling in her voice. Keanu let out a quiet chuckle, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Morning, kiddo." Without hesitation, Sophie climbed onto the couch beside him, settling in like they had known each other forever. She looked at him for a moment, then reached out and poked his cheek with her tiny finger. "You slept here," she announced matter-of-factly. Keanu smiled. "I did." Sophie considered this, then nodded in approval, as if granting him permission to be there. The warmth in Keanu's chest caught him off guard. He wasn't sure why this simple moment, this child's effortless acceptance, felt so significant. Just then, Anna appeared in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw them together, her gaze lingering on Keanu, then on Sophie, who was now happily leaning against him. For a moment, she just stood there, watching. She had spent so long doing everything alone, never expecting anyone to stay. But Keanu was still here. It shouldn't have meant as much as it did. But it did. "Morning," he greeted, his voice soft. Anna swallowed, shaking herself from her thoughts. "Morning," she echoed. She hesitated before asking, "Did you sleep okay?" Keanu stretched slightly. "Yeah. Your couch is surprisingly comfortable." Sophie giggled. "Told you. It's the best couch ever." Anna smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Coffee?" Keanu nodded. "That sounds great." As she walked into the kitchen, Keanu sat back, watching Sophie as she hummed softly to herself. He had spent years moving from project to project, never truly planting roots. And yet, here he was. Not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. As Keanu sat in Anna's cozy living room, sipping his coffee, he found himself wondering about something he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years: what happens next? Anna sat across from him, holding Sophie in her lap. The little girl was still drowsy, blinking sleepily as she clung to her stuffed bunny. The peacefulness of the moment felt almost surreal. Keanu wasn't used to this quiet, domestic normalcy. And yet, he didn't feel out of place. Anna looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, as if sensing the question in his mind, she spoke first. "So, what happens now?" she asked softly. Keanu exhaled, staring down at his coffee. That was the question, wasn't it? Did he walk away, let this be just a fleeting moment, a sweet memory of a night that unexpectedly touched him? Or did he stay? Could he? He looked up, meeting Anna's eyes. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. She nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "I didn't expect you to stay last night," she said quietly. "And I won't expect you to stay after today." There was no accusation in her voice, no disappointment. Just understanding. Keanu set his coffee down, leaning forward slightly. I don't know what happens next, he repeated, this time more certain. But I don't want this to be the last time. Anna swallowed, surprised by the quiet conviction in his voice. Okay, she whispered. And in that moment, it was enough. Neither of them had all the answers. But for the first time in a long time, neither of them had to figure it out alone.